Welcome back, everyone. Is here, and today I've got some r/stories about Kevin for you all. As per usual, I'll be reading you the posts, giving you my opinions, and I hope you do the same down in the comments below. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. As a super quick further ado, Gamercept is currently doing a Christmas gift with purchase sale, so that's going to be while supplies last, so if this interests you, you know where to go. Use code OZ at checkout. Thank you! And of course, today we're continuing the Stories About Kevin saga of the Big Rig. If you missed yesterday's video, you'll probably want the additional context and shenanigans that are following this post, because oh boy, is it hair-pullingly frustrating. Kevin in a Big Rig Part 5, The Shutdown. Backstory. This story takes place only a few days after the events in Part 4. Kevin and I were heading towards Salt Lake City, but the winter weather that had been slowly ramping up for the past month was slowly getting worse. We had been fortunate up to this point that the snow and ice hadn't caused any delays, but luck was about to run out. This story begins one night in Fort Platt, Nebraska on Interstate 80. Kevin, having driven the day shift, had parked the truck and we changed places. Believe it or not, I sure as hell didn't, Kevin had actually learned from me and decided to not only stop in a safe place, but at our designated fuel stop. That meant we could get food, fuel, and do a truck inspection. This was one of the few times Kevin made a rational decision. While Kevin went into the truck stop, I refueled and inspected the truck. After making sure the truck was in good shape, I take a look at the weather. A massive winter storm had been building up, and all predictions put it, and us, on a collision course. The company's safety department had sent several weather alerts and issued a few restrictions. My personal rule is that shutting down early is more preferable to shutting down late. I discovered that Wyoming, the next state we were to cross into, was taking a serious pounding from the storm and several accidents were already being reported. Thank God it was my shift this time, or Kevin would have wadded the truck and us into a tight little ball in a ditch. I knew we wouldn't make much progress, but since the roads were still dry and the snow wasn't yet falling, I figured I would be able to make it close to Wyoming before shutting down, let the storm pass, and continue on once the roads were clear. I had driven this route many times by this point and knew the best places to be stuck. I set the GPS to take us to a truck stop just past the Wyoming state line, go inside for a quick bite, and we head out. It wasn't long before the leading edge of the storm had caught us. The further along I drove, the worse the weather deteriorated. Snow flurries melted on the highway, only to be frozen by the rapidly decreasing temperature, and larger, heavier snow began sticking to the road. In typical fashion for the safety department, their weather alerts were about 2 hours behind, and where they had issued orders to slow down or shut down were for areas well inside the storm. According to them, we could drive the speed limit and they wouldn't say anything. Fortunately, I knew better than to trust the judgment of someone nearly 1,000 miles away about the weather I was looking at through the windshield. I had made it about 100 miles when conditions forced my hand. I had already had to reduce speed to barely creeping, and the road was invisible beneath the snow. After watching another truck who was driving way too fast lose control and end up in the ditch, I make the call to shut down. I pull into a rather large truck stop not far from the Wyoming state line. By this point, the snow was so deep, the trailer bumper was acting like a snowplow, and the tires were having trouble gaining traction. I finally get the truck parked until dispatch were shut down. As I set the truck's idle control system, Kevin wakes up and asks, "Are we still in Indiana?" In case you're not familiar with US geography, Indiana is a very long way from Wyoming. We hadn't been there for days. "We're in a big spring and we're shut down. We're gonna be here for a while," I tell him. "Did safety tell us to?" "I made the call. It's gotten pretty bad." He mumbles that he'll get us going once his 10-hour break is up, but I know safety will issue a shutdown, albeit later than it should be. I grab a snack, pull the bunk privacy curtains closed, and settle in. I decided to make use of the downtime to work on Operation Ditch the Dipshit. For the past couple of days, I had been writing down everything I could remember since day one with First Kevin. I jot down everything, major and minor, along with dates, times, and locations. Every misturn, unnecessary detour, and violation Kevin had made goes on the list. My plan was to copy it all to email, but I wanted to make sure nothing was left out. While first Kevin was asleep, I decided to go through the truck's computer records. I start by going through Kevin's hours of service log. This is a legally required record that shows what a driver does every single day. Since drivers can only drive a set number of hours per day, any violation would show on the log. Best of all, these computer logs couldn't be tampered with. Every time he drove longer than he should have, I made a note. The computer also keeps a record of abnormal truck activities. One of these is called hard braking event. A hard braking event is, as the name suggests, is an instance where the truck experiences excessive braking. Remember how I said Kevin was heavy on the brakes? Well, the computer agreed. There were dozens, if not hundreds, of these records filed during his drive shifts. To be clear, it takes a very hard brake check to trip one of these events. I used my phone to snap a quick photo of the computer screen. I made my notes and climbed back into my bunk for the rest of the night. The next morning, I wake up and go to the front of the cab and check the computer for messages. As I predicted, safety had issued a mandatory shutdown for all trucks in our area. Just as well. Otherwise, I'd have to duct tape Kevin to his bunk to keep him from trying to leave. The storm was still dumping snow, and the paved parking lot of the truck stop is packed full of trucks, and the interstate, visible from our parking spot, is dead quiet. No one was going anywhere. Despite this, I breathe a sigh of relief. Kevin might be stupid, but his sycophant attitude meant he wouldn't dare defy the company. We were safe for the time being. Kevin wakes up a little while later. "Are we still in Illinois?" he asks. "No," I reply cautiously. "We're in Nebraska, close to Wyoming. Safety has shut us down." "Oh," he replies and goes back to the bunk. It was then that I knew something about Kevin was off, more so than I thought. Twice in the last 12 hours, he's forgotten where we are. Indiana and Illinois are behind us by a few days at this point. There's no way he could be that confused. I try to put it out of my mind for the time being and decide to brave the weather in the interest of breakfast. I grab some food and coffee and check the weather conditions to the west. Wyoming DOT had shut down the entire interstate and over 200 accidents had been reported in the past 24 hours. I talked to a few drivers who had come in from the west and their accounts matched the reports. It's pretty clear that we're not going anywhere soon. After about an hour, I head back out to the truck and decide to catch up on some sleep. Kevin is fully awake at this point, messing around with the computer. As I climb inside, he asks, "Are we still in Illinois?" "What?" He still doesn't know where we are. "No," I explain, "we're in Nebraska. We got here last night and haven't been in Illinois for days. You don't remember?" This was the question that answered far more than I thought. Kevin explained to me that about a year before, he had been involved in a serious car accident, one of many. According to him, he ran off the road at a high speed. He was hospitalized with a shattered leg, his bad leg now, and was in a coma for 21 days. His doctors told him that being in a coma that long would likely cause some brain damage, and it had. He had difficulty with his short-term memory and would literally forget something he did 5 minutes before. This wasn't entirely new to me, as he had told this story before. In fact, he had told me countless times over the past 2 months, and it was always the same. Bad car accident, 21-day coma, and busted leg. "Right," I reply. "Well, the weather is pretty bad, so get comfortable. We're gonna be here a while." I then climb back into my bunk. Kevin, citing his bad leg, wants to try and find a parking spot close to the store, but I tell him the lot is completely full, and if he moves the truck, we could lose this spot. Reluctantly, he decides to stay put. In my bunk, I go over Kevin's story. 21-day coma, short-term memory loss, numerous car accidents. If I was asked to pick a person to deny a CDL, it would be Kevin. And not because of the hell I had already been through because of him. Driving a truck is dangerous at the best of times. Add a brain-damaged driver, and the risk increases exponentially. I knew that this company literally hired anyone who gave them a phone call, but what doctor in his right mind would grant someone with brain damage a DOT medical card? I pulled out my notes and jot down Kevin's story as he told it. Later that day, Kevin wakes me up from a nap. I'm in my bunk, and he asks, again, "Are we in Illinois?" I sigh, defeated. "No, Kevin, we're in Nebraska. You've asked that 3 times already." "Oh, well, I have bad short-term memory. See, I was in a car wreck and..." He repeats the same story again, practically word for word. "Did safety shut us down?" he asked. "Yes, so did Wyoming DOT, I explain. "Oh, okay." He goes quiet again. We end up stuck for 2 full days waiting for the road conditions to clear. By late morning on the 3rd day, we received word that the road conditions have improved to the point where we can proceed. By that point, Kevin had repeated his story another 3 times. Each time, he was completely unaware he had told it earlier. By this point, I've decided there is something seriously wrong with this guy, and he's a danger to himself and anyone sharing a highway with him. I didn't know if I can get him off the road at that point, but I knew I could get reassigned. Our unexpected downtime had given me time to work out my exit strategy. I volunteered to take the first shift. I figured if the roads are iffy, I have the better chance of getting through it safely. This was a good call on my part, as I counted no fewer than 20 accident sites in the first 50 miles. Many of these still hadn't been cleared, and the vehicles were left in the ditch or median. I managed to get a good distance into Wyoming before needing to swap with Kevin. The weather had broken, and everything between us and Salt Lake City was clear. As Kevin started his shift, everything that occurred during our shutdown replayed in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. Kevin wasn't just stupid, he was a ticking time bomb. It was time to get as far away from him as I could. Before I went to sleep, I take out my notes and cell phone and begin composing an email. I address it to my fleet manager and CC the safety director. It would take a while to finish as I planned to make sure they knew everything I had seen and experienced over the past 2 months. Given the nature of corporate politics, I expected to encounter some resistance and being ignored, but that was fine. It would only make the situation worse for them in the long run. Part 6. Breakdown. Backstory. This story takes place about a week after the events of Part 5. Kevin and I made our delivery in Salt Lake City without incident, and took another load north to Seattle, Washington. We had picked up another load that was bound for the East Coast when yet another disaster struck. I had made the initial pickup in Renton, Washington, and headed east on Interstate 90. Since I had driven half the night before the pickup and into the mid-morning, my drive time for the day expired around Tanner, Washington, and Kevin and I switched out. Ahead of us lay barren and mountainous terrain and nearly 3,000 miles of highway across the northern states of the lower 48. Combine that with the ever-threatening winter storms, Kevin's horrible driving skills, and a dwindling supply of tolerance on my part, I was beginning to wonder if Kevin would kill us both before I could get rid of him. At the end of my drive shifts each day, I had been religiously copying the information from the notes I had taken into an email on my phone. I addressed it to my fleet manager and the company safety director. Using the most professional and courteous language, I outlined everything I had witnessed over the past 2.5 months. I had reached the point where I didn't want revenge or compensation, or even demand he be fired. I just wanted to get away from him. But in order to do that, I need a valid reason so management would be convinced. One reason? How about 100? Kevin took over and proceeded east along Interstate 90 towards Idaho. As was my habit by this point, I rode shotgun upon first leaving out at first. I'm still in the jump seat when we reach Snoqualmie Pass. In my opinion, there are 3 critical skills that all drivers must learn if they want to last long enough in the industry to make any real money. Navigation, backing up with a trailer, and going down a long, steep mountain grade, fully loaded. Going up a mountain might be slow and arduous. Going down can quickly turn deadly. If a driver doesn't control the speed during the descent, he'll find himself behind the wheel of a runaway death machine. To make the situation more difficult, the brakes of the truck can overheat and completely fail if overused. making the loss of control inevitable. If you've ever driven through mountains and seen runaway truck ramps, that's exactly what they are for. A pre-selected crash scene. Most trucks now have a feature called engine brakes, more commonly known to truck drivers as Jake brakes. Unlike the typical wheel brakes, engine brakes cause the truck to slow down by restricting airflow in the engine. This causes the engine to add resistance in the drivetrain and serve as a sort of drogue chute. Also, unlike wheel brakes, engine brakes will not overheat or fail from overuse. When used properly, they can make going down a mountain grade far more efficient and safe. The use of engine brakes also happens to be one of the issues Kevin and I disagreed upon. While I had been properly instructed by my trainer on how to use the engine brakes effectively, Kevin was adamantly opposed to them. He wasn't shy about voicing his disapproval of my using them, but there was very little he could do about it. His opinion wasn't due to some rational reason. It was simply because the company's safety department said so. During post-training orientation, the course presenters often had made a major issue about how engine brakes weren't that useful, and that they wish they didn't come with the trucks. I later learned that these presenters were drivers who mostly quit within 2 months. I learned from my trainer, a 30-year trucking veteran, that engine brakes were a lifesaver. Kevin, being the sycophant he was, believed that anything the company higher-up said was the gospel truth. And there we were. Myself, Kevin, a fully loaded truck, and the long, steep decline that was Snoqualmie Pass. Yep, I said to myself, I am definitely regretting my life choices right now. Kevin starts down the pass. He was in top gear and the truck begins to accelerate rapidly. Since he's not using the engine brakes, the only way he can control the truck's speed without overusing the wheel brakes is to downshift. In order to do that, he must reduce speed. Shifting gears in a semi is a lot different than a regular car, since a truck transmission will only go into gear if it and the engine are at the proper speed for the gear being selected. Kevin slams on the brakes, throwing everything in the cab that isn't tied down forward. He tries to downshift, but his timing is off. For a few heart-stopping seconds, the truck is essentially dropping down the side of a mountain in a free fall before Kevin manages to wrestle the truck into gear with another whiplash brake check into grinding protest from the transmission. The engine revs up sharply as it fights against gravity and the excess speed for the gear. Kevin, again, applies extremely heavy braking, and I grab the handhold above me and push myself back into the seat to cushion the jolt. At this point, I look over at the dash tachometer. It's reading over 1,700 RPM. The normal operating range for this truck is between 1,000 and 1,500 RPM. Slowing down and reducing the engine speed is vital at this point. Even Kevin knew that. He does, applying heavy braking again to slow the engine to just under 1,500 RPM, and the speed appears to be relatively stable. Then, in a move that I can only describe as divine stupidity, Kevin forces the transmission into the next lowest gear. And when I say forced, I mean the truck was actively fighting him as if it were an animal raging in a trap. The gears of the transmission were grinding so hard, I thought they would be worn down before he reached the bottom of the hill. Eventually, however, Kevin's stubborn determination won out, and the truck went into gear. The truck screamed in protest. I glanced at the tachometer, and it's showing close to 2,000 RPM, way outside the operating limits. Too much of this, and the engine will literally tear itself apart. I knew. What does Kevin do? Nothing. God damn it! I scream at him, trying to make myself heard over the tortured engine. Slow down! Don't tell me how to drive, Kevin snaps back. Apparently, he believes this is normal. I swear to God, Kevin, if you wreck this truck! My sentence was cut off by yet another hard break, and I'm wondering if I can stab this little bastard, take over the truck, and claim self-defense. We went down that long, steep hill for what felt like hours. The screaming engine begged for mercy, and Kevin was completely oblivious. At any moment, I was expecting the engine to explode in a fiery death, taking us to our own a few moments later. But, to its credit, it held on just long enough. We get to the bottom of the hill, and the stress on both the engine and my nerves finally dissipates. At first, I think we dodged yet another bullet. The truck seems to be no worse for wear, and I managed not to kill Kevin. At that moment, the dashboard lights up more than the annual Christmas tree at Rockefeller Plaza. Every warning light and alarm buzzer is going off as if we're in a movie helicopter that had just been hit by a rocket. I swear under my breath and begin looking at my phone for repair shops, truck stops, or anywhere nearby where we can get help. And then, as suddenly as it started, the dash goes quiet, and the lights turn off. It wasn't a relief, more of the eerie quiet. "That's not good," I say, knowing this wasn't some electronic glitch. I go back to my phone. It's the only thing I can do to keep me from snapping Kevin's neck. By some obscene stroke of luck, there's a dealership service shop at the next exit. It was just then that the dashboard lights and alarms make an encore appearance. "I think something's wrong with the truck," Kevin said, as if I hadn't already worked out that much for myself. I gave Kevin my hardest glare. "No shit, Sherlock," I reply. "You just fell off a fucking mountain and blew up the engine." What do we do?" he asked, like a lost little boy. I take this moment to highlight his stupidity. "I don't know, Super Trucker. You're the one who knows everything. Why don't you tell me?" To say my nerves were frayed at this point would be a gross understatement. Kevin keeps looking between the road and the dash. I can tell he's lost, confused, and clueless. Just then, the engine derates, essentially limiting its speed and horsepower in order to prevent further damage. Something is seriously wrong, and Kevin is completely useless. "Next exit," I say. "There's a dealership shop." Kevin nods nervously. He rounds a bend and the exit comes in sight. Despite the truck's reduced speed, Kevin is about to blow right past, something he can't really well afford to do. "Kevin, exit now," I say. Here?" he asks, unsure. "Now!" I scream, not even trying to be civil. Kevin takes the exit, braking extremely hard again to get slow enough so as to not overturn the truck. I can see the sign for the dealership and guide Kevin to it. We pull into the parking lot just moments before the truck dies. "Charmed life, I think." I turn to Kevin and say, "You send dispatch a message. Tell them where we are and that we're checking into the shop. I'll go talk to the shop." He doesn't get a chance to protest as I jump out and head inside. The techs run a diagnostic and find a long list of fault codes. I have nothing to coordinate between dispatch and the shop because the company maintenance overseer knew nothing about the trucks and Kevin was completely useless. And find out that the truck will need to be in the shop overnight. They reluctantly agree to spring for a hotel room within walking distance, and we go check in. Kevin and I spent about 3 days in that hotel while the truck was being repaired. Kevin, by virtue of his short-term memory problems, had completely forgotten about how it was all his doing. He gave some speech about how dangerous engine brakes were, but I reminded him that he was the one who was driving when the truck broke down. He tried to pass the blame, but it didn't matter. I had a more important task to focus on. If you ever needed or wanted to know how to make a rigid corporate structure act in your favor, you might want to take notes. I had been gathering evidence against Kevin for about 2 weeks before we broke down. In those 2 weeks, I had been able to gather enough problems against him that would make a district attorney green with envy. I divided my time between copying my notes to email and jotting down new items as they cropped up. It was tedious, as the list never seemed to go down, but eventually the email was ready. The only question that remained was who exactly would get the email. Normally, I would simply email my fleet manager, like one would a supervisor. The problem was such major issues would need nearly every department in the loop. The only problem was the company was strictly compartmentalized and often territorial. It wasn't uncommon to get messages from 3 or 4 department heads for one minor infraction. For example, when I had to request fuel in Indiana, I had to explain why to the route planning manager, fleet fuel controller, and the planning department in addition to my supervisory fleet manager. Not only was this incredibly ineffective and annoying, it did provide insight into how the system could be manipulated. For all its segmented nature, there was one department that had full authority over any other. That was the safety department. Since every trucking company must take safety seriously, the safety managers are taken very seriously. More often than not, a safety manager held more power than the CEO and was the one department who could rally the others to a cause. My plan was to send emails to the heads of every department that had jurisdiction over any of Kevin's violations. Hours of service, planning, human resources, driver training, each department head would get the email. In addition, my fleet manager and the safety manager would get the exact same email. With any luck, one of the emails would trigger an investigation, the findings of which would start a chain reaction. At best, the safety manager would order every department to look into the matter. What I was careful not to do was come off as accusatory or demanding. My philosophy has been to assume ignorance before malevolence. That is, assume that the company simply wasn't aware of what was going on. And if I demanded that Kevin was fired, I would risk coming across as bitter and spiteful, which would accomplish nothing. No, my emails would be professional, concise, detailed, and presented in a way that would say, "Hey, I found these problems and I wanted to bring them to your attention." The issues themselves would cause the panic. It was during this breakdown that I put the finishing touches on my plan. I dug through the company directory for the relevant emails, organized the documents and photos in the email, and arranged the list of violations by the relevant departments. If and when an investigation took place, all they would have to do is look where I pointed. I had nearly completed the email during the 3-day downtime while awaiting repairs. The day the truck was repaired, Kevin and I went to shop a few hours before the truck was released. When the techs told us it was ready, I was surprised Kevin offered to sign it out and take the first shift of the day. It was uncharacteristically generous of him, which I found suspicious, but did not say so. I decided to make a restroom stop before we left out. On the way out the door, I walked by the service desk. The tech who worked on our truck was finishing up the ticket and waved me over. "Hey," he said, somewhat bewildered. "Aren't you with the short guy with the limp?" "Yeah, why you ask?" I reply. "Well, he asked a weird question." I take a deep breath. I had a feeling what the question would be. "Let me guess, he was asking about the engine brakes." The tech was taken aback. "Yeah, he wanted to know how to disable them. I thought it was weird because why would anybody want to do that?" I shake my head in disgust and glance over to make sure Kevin isn't in the room. "Did you tell him?" "Hell no," the tech admitted. "You'd be an idiot not to have them on." I nod in agreement. "By the way," I ask, "what was it that was wrong with the truck?" "Oh, there was some cracks in the turbocharger housing," he explained. "Uh-huh. And would keeping the engine at 2,000 RPM all the way down Snoqualmie cause that?" He looked at me knowingly. "You better tell someone about him if he can't drive any better than that." "Oh, don't worry," I assured him. "I will." Part 7. Flashpoint. Backstory. These events take place over the span of a couple of days immediately following the events in Part 6, Breakdown. The 3-day breakdown had forced dispatch to call in another truck to rescue the load. I had figured as much since the load was considered high priority, and with an even more serious winter storm than what we faced in Nebraska bearing down on us, dispatch wanted to get the load to its destination as soon as possible. That left myself, Kevin, a repaired truck, an empty trailer, and precious little time before we became stranded again by Old Man Winter. Almost as soon as we get the truck out of the shop from Kevin's fiasco on Snoqualmie, dispatch sends us a load. It was to pick up in Lewiston, Idaho, that same evening and deliver in Chicago. I was relieved as this put us heading away from the storm and, with luck, would keep us ahead of it. When I plotted the route, however, I was abruptly reminded that while the patron saint of truckers might protect those who call upon him, he also has a very morbid sense of humor. Lewiston is a mountain town along the Washington-Idaho border. From where we began, it would take the better part of a day traveling through the remote areas with little chance of assistance if something were to happen. And because I hadn't suffered enough, the only way into Lewiston was south, along US 95, and down another steep mountain grade. That was worse than Snoqualmie. How bad? Well, if Snoqualmie was a black diamond ski slope, Lewiston would be a triple black diamond skull and crossbones level and require a signed waiver of liability and clearance from a psychiatrist. And just for kicks, Kevin would be driving us there. Upon realizing this, I texted my mom, told her I loved her and that I was probably going to be dead in the next few hours. She thought I was drunk. For the first few hours, I stayed in the bunk trying to get what little sleep I could. Kevin's horrendous driving did not help matters as I was constantly being woken up by my head being slammed into a cabinet by his excessive braking. I finally had to use my jacket as a makeshift cushion and keep my head from suffering a concussion. The truck drove on and on and on. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and fleeting. The jarring of the brakes and the whine of the over-revving engine foretold of an impending fate so terrifying as to make Edgar Allan Poe wet the bed and Stephen King buy a nightlight. As the sky grew dark and the cold air began to bite, I decided I had slept as much as I could, pulled on my boots, and went up front. I looked out of the windshield and saw what I had been dreading. The warning sign for the steep drop into Lewiston. The highway on which we made the descent was also the town's main thoroughfare. Fall off the cliff, roll into town. Any loss of control here and a lot of people besides us would more than likely be killed. I just hoped that if I did die that night, it was quick, painless, and Kevin would join me so I could beat his ass for all eternity. Kevin started down the grade, picking up speed too fast at first, but thanks to being empty, speed control was much easier. Still, adamantly opposed to engine brakes, he maintained his speed through downshifting and heavy braking, much like what he attempted to do in Snoqualmie. When we finally managed to stabilize his speed, I lit a cigarette because I think all people doomed to die deserve one last smoke. But it wasn't my last smoke, or my last day on Earth. Despite everything, Kevin managed to get the truck down the mountain and into the town without it ending in a fiery crash. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding, and take a long drag of my cigarette to calm my nerves. We were safe for the time being. Kevin manages to get us to the pickup, after getting lost of course, and we change out while we're being loaded. I sit down in the driver's seat and program the route into my GPS. Getting back to the interstate was going to be tougher. I saw, as it was more remote wilderness, mountainous terrain, and little chance of help in an emergency. Adding to the difficulty was the fact that the storm we were desperately trying to outrun was catching up to us. Fortunately, it wasn't long before we get fully loaded and head to a local truck stop to top off the tanks, since it was nearly 150 miles to the nearest truck stop. I refuel the tank while Kevin goes inside the store. After several minutes, both fuel tanks filled, and Kevin still inside doing God knows what, I pull the truck out of the fuel pumps and pull around to the parking area. I dash inside, grab some food, drink, and smokes, and come back to the truck to find Kevin still isn't back yet. I begin to fantasize about what's keeping him. Stroke? Brain aneurysm? Abducted by aliens? They do tend to take the dumbest people after all, but alas, the hope was fleeting as I soon see him hobbling his way across the parking lot towards the truck, carrying a plastic bag and looking like a hobo about to ask for $1. Kevin opens the passenger door and climbs inside. "Hey, motherfucker!" he yelled angrily. "Why'd you move the truck?" I point at the "all trucks proceed to parking when feeling complete" signs hanging near the diesel pumps. "Because I can read, dickhead," I reply. "You know I have a bad leg. It hurts to walk that far. Do that again and I'll kick your ass," he threatens weakly. If you recall in part 2, I mentioned I was at least 1 foot taller and 100 pounds heavier than Kevin, so his threat was more comical than menacing. "Oh really?" I reply. "You wouldn't lift a foot above my knees before I rip that leg off and beat you to death with it. Sit the fuck down and shut up." He mumbled something, but I didn't hear him as I released the brakes and pull out of the parking lot. The climb up the mountain was slow and painstaking. Snow was just starting to fall, but not yet heavy enough to be a serious concern. Kevin, riding shotgun, was grumbling about his leg, the cold and whatever else he felt like complaining about. I get to the top of the hill and press on, trying like hell to stay in front of the storm. Kevin remained up front, though he had moved past griping and onto bragging about his future plans. Apparently, he had high aspirations for his trucking career. In a few months, he was going to become a lead driver, the title the company gave to driver trainers, and work his students like racial slur. His words, not mine. He also planned on becoming an independent contractor by leasing a truck through the company and making a lot more money. This would also allow him to run a little side business with his nephew, who, according to Kevin, was sub-major player in prison chapter of the Aryan Brotherhood. He claimed his nephew could set him up running contraband out of Mexico. I paid very little attention to him as I'm more concerned about the winter storm that's almost on top of us. We start going down a hill. Nothing serious, but enough that I take my foot off the accelerator. I never trust cruise control in a semi. This causes the engine brakes to engage, and on cue, Kevin takes it personally. "If you were my student," he said, trying to sound pretentious, "I'd fail you for that." "What the fuck ever, man. At least I can go 5 minutes without getting lost," I reply, not missing a beat. "Don't use those things on my truck," he demands. "I'm not, dumbass," I shoot back. "This is the company truck. Remember?" Just then, we start down another hill, this one a bit longer, but not overly steep. Again, I release the accelerator, and the engine brakes re-engage. This was apparently the last straw for Kevin. He reaches down, unbuckles his seatbelt, and reaches over towards the steering wheel. The activation button for the engine brakes is on the right side of the steering wheel. I see his hand and slap it away. "Cut it out, dickhead," I tell him. He tries again, this time getting out of his seat and towering over me while reaching for the engine brake button. This is extremely dangerous. As it's dark, we're on a narrow road and visibility is reduced because of the snow. I don't have the luxury of handling this diplomatically, so I grab him by the shirt with my right hand and literally throw him back into the passenger seat hard enough that his head bounces off the window. "If you ever pull a stunt like that again," I tell him, "I will break every bone in your body and leave you to the buzzards. You're not a lead driver, and this is not your truck. Sit down, buckle up, and shut up." Kevin obviously hadn't expected that reaction. Apparently, he was living in a fantasy universe where he was the trainer and I was the student. I suppose that knock to the head was enough to bring him back to reality, or as close as he could get, since he buckled his seatbelt and went about copying the company route to his precious notebook. A couple of hours pass in silence. The snow begins to fall heavier and accumulate on the ground and stick to the road. The wind had begun to pick up and was rocking the truck side to side. It felt like an eternity since we had seen the last town, car, or even abandoned building. I had just started to begin thinking that maybe we hadn't survived the downgrade into Lewiston and this was my own personal hell, when, far in the distance, I see the lights of a town. I check the GPS, and sure enough, it's exactly where we are to rejoin Interstate 90. I was less excited about being on the interstate as I was about the prospect of finding shelter from the approaching storm. As we make our way through town, I keep my eyes peeled for a truck stop. Walmart, gas station, anything. that might offer a safe harbor for the night. But to my increasing dismay, nothing. To make matters worse, the town appeared to be deserted. Even the 24-hour convenience stores were dark and empty. Suddenly, a few miles before reaching the interchange, a message comes across the computer. Kevin takes the computer and reads it. "It's a weather alert," he says. "It says we have to shut down." "Of course," I say, still looking for somewhere to park and finding nothing. "Keep an eye out for a truck parking spot." We get closer to the interstate and find nothing. Even the gas stations with truck diesel lanes are clearly posted, "No truck parking." My only alternative is to get back on the interstate and keep going until I find somewhere to shut down. I'll admit, this is the last thing I wanted to do, but my hands were tied. Kevin, however, simply could not understand the situation. "Why are you getting on the interstate?" he asked. "Safety told us to shut down." "Yeah, but there's nowhere to shut down," I reply. "You have to stop," he insists. "Safety will write you up." "Where? On the side of City Highway? You really think that's a good idea, jackass?" Looking back now, I see how ironic this question was. Kevin gave up. Apparently, being thrown bodily against a window one-handed takes away your nerve. "Well, if safety says anything, it's on you," he says. I'm fine with that. And I'll tell them the same thing I'm telling you. You can't just stop in the middle of the fucking road. I take the on-ramp to Interstate 90 eastbound. I keep my speed at around 45 miles per hour, 72 kilometers per hour. Since, knowing we shouldn't be out here according to safety, I can at least use the fact that I was driving at a greatly reduced speed to say, yeah, I know, I should be shut down, but there's nowhere to shut down, so I have to keep going until I find a place to shut down. I plod along the Interstate 90 through the Idaho Panhandle and find nowhere to park. The truck computer is going crazy, dinging every few minutes with messages wanting to know why we are traveling through a shutdown area. I can't send any replies since I'm driving, and Kevin is content to let me deal with it. I drive well into Montana before I see Salvation, a truck safety rest area. It's little more than a super wide shoulder on the side of the highway, but it's reasonably safe, legal for us to use, and, more importantly, it has enough room for us to get into. I guide the truck into a parking spot, shut off the headlights, and pick up the computer. I put myself off duty and go about responding to the messages. All but one are automated messages about the shutdown notice and the fact that we are operating in one. The one non-automated message is from the night dispatcher. You are operating inside of a shutdown area. Please shut down as soon as possible. The message asked. What the hell did you think I was planning, dickhead? I say to the screen. I reply, could not find safe and legal parking spot when alert received. Was forced to continue on until a safe and legal parking area could be found. We are now shut down. Intentionally used the words safe and legal in my reply because according to the company's own driver handbook, a truck that receives a weather shutdown notice must find a safe and legal place to shut down until the notice is lifted. That was their own policy verbatim. I was just following it. Safe and legal. I decided to go back to the bunk and sleep. It was pretty obvious we were going nowhere until morning at least. The next morning, I'm awakened by the sound of the truck brakes releasing. I jump out of my bunk and check the computer. Safety had released the shutdown and implemented a 45-mile-per-hour limit for the area. Kevin took it upon himself to take the first shift, so I crawled back into the bunk. A couple of hours later, I'm woken up by my phone ringing. I check it. Unknown number. But the area code matches the company headquarters, so I answer. Hello? I answer. Hi, is this OP? Driver ID 9876? Replied the voice. Yeah. This is Ken, not real name. From safety, this call is being recorded. We had a report that you willfully violated a mandatory shutdown area last night. Son of a bitch. Kevin tried to turn me into safety after the stunt he pulled with the engine brakes. Well, Ken, I reply, I suppose that depends on your definition of violated. Did you continue to drive after receiving a notice of the shutdown? Yes, I answered truthfully. Can you explain why? Well, Ken, if you refer to the company driver handbook, such and such page and such paragraph, you'll see that it clearly states that, and I quote, upon receiving a shutdown alert, the driver must park the truck as soon as it is safe and legal to do so, end quote. Now, as I told the night dispatcher, I was not in an area that provided safe and legal parking, and therefore was forced to continue on until safe and legal parking could be found. However, I was well aware of the dangerous road and weather conditions and elected to proceed at a speed no faster than 45 miles per hour, 72 kilometers per hour, and shut down at the nearest safe and legal place available. For a few moments, Ken was quiet, but I heard the telltale tapping of a computer keyboard through the phone. I see. Well, looking at your route, I see that there was very little in the way of parking or facilities. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock, I think to myself. That was my assessment of the situation as well, I confirm. Well, he continued, we received this report from an anonymous phone call and we had to follow it up. Anonymous my ass. Am I being written up for this? Not at the time, since as you say, you were trying to get to a safe, legal parking area. We may look into this matter further at a later time. However, I would like to stress that you take care in the future. I manage to hide my rage when I respond. Always do. Thanks. And hung up. For a few moments, I stared at the bunk ceiling in furious disbelief. Anonymous phone call. Yeah, that was bullshit since there was only one person who knew I had driven at that time who would have made a phone call. Kevin, the rat-fink bastard, had tried to grass me up on the sly. Only he made one critical mistake. He underestimated me. I knew the safety policy, apparently better than the safety department themselves, and I had probably saved my job and career by doing so. No doubt the little shit thought he won by his little ass-kissing exhibition, and he would no doubt try again when he realized it didn't work. But he wouldn't get that chance. Oh no. Run game on me, little man, and I'll show you how it's played. I open my phone's email app and go to the saved email draft I had been preparing for so long. I attach the photos of the computer logs, double-check for missing issues, add in about the incident where he tried to grab the steering wheel while I was driving, and plug in the email addresses of the relevant department heads. I also make one addition to the end of the email, letting them know that seeing as how the issue was habitual and ongoing, I would continue to provide daily updates via email on Kevin's infractions and unsafe actions. Why email, you wonder? Well, in the eyes of the law, an email is considered an official document. By using email, I could use it as proof that I communicated the issue to the company. If the situation progressed to the point where legal action became necessary, the emails could be used as evidence that the company was made aware of the issue, but did nothing. That is negligence. I knew it, and they should know it too, I thought. Well, they claim to put safety first, so let's see. I give the email a final once-over. It's ready, I think. I move my thumb up to the send icon and freeze. For a moment, a tiny voice of doubt pipes up. Is this the right thing to do? You could put yourself in the firing lines with this. Even if you pull it off, it could ruin Kevin's life. Is what he did so bad to really be worth that? For a moment, I almost considered not going through with it. Just ask for a new co-driver, and that thought was interrupted by my forehead banging off the cabinet again. Kevin and his piss-poor driving. Never mind, I tell myself decisively. Fuck this asshole. And hit send. There was the slightest bit of regret when I saw the status of the email change from sending to sent. Oh well, too late now. No turning back. The missiles were in the air. Nothing left to do but wait. I haven't really given too much commentary on this one because of just how much there actually is, but this is probably one of the best examples of the Dunning-Kruger effect that I've ever seen in action. Don't forget, this is brought to you by GamerSupps. Use code ODDS at checkout. It's basically a caffeine powder that you put in your water, and I actually really like it. I use this on a daily basis. Don't forget that every purchase you make using code ODDS directly supports the channel. And if you want a personal recommendation from me, I would either recommend the Soda Pressing Pear or Dragon Fruit Punch. Those two are currently my favorite flavors. And as a note, once we sell a certain amount of stuff, I get my own flavor and my own cup. And you all know I'm gonna choose some degenerate shit that's gonna make their PR team squirm. My goal is to make them regret partnering with me. So please, use code EYES at checkout to make my dream come true of making a PR team squirm.